Hello everyone, I'm Jack Fisher and welcome to my world. And I freely admit that I'm a big fan of romance. From books to movies to TVs to cartoons, if it has romance in it, it appeals to me, plain and simple. I understand there's still a taboo of sorts for men who like romance. I've even felt it at times. Years ago, I actively hid my fondness for certain romance movies, some of which could be classified as full-blown chick flicks. But these days, I feel like the cultural attitudes have shifted. It's no longer that weird for a straight man like me to enjoy a sappy love story. There's still room for improvement, but that's exactly why I think romance is worth talking about, especially when it's done right. Because sadly, romantic subplots are among the easiest subplots to botch horribly. You get characters who are put together with no discernible chemistry. Think Anakin Skywalker and Padme in the Star Wars prequel trilogy. You have romances that are just dragged out for way too long, a la Ross and Rachel in Friends. And you also get relationships that are just so unbalanced, if not downright unhealthy. See half the relationships in The Big Bang Theory. Believe me, when you're a romance fan, you notice this shit. But I don't want to focus on all the love stories that fail horribly. Instead, I want to highlight a love story that works. Moreover, it works so beautifully on so many levels that it raises the bar for romantic subplots as a whole. And that brings me to The Dragon Prince, an animated Netflix series that looks like it's for kids, but make no mistake, this show has something for everyone. It's by the same visionaries behind Avatar: The Last Airbender, so you know it's full of quality writing, quirky humor, and well-developed characters. Now, I could talk for hours about the fantasy lore, the world building, and the story structure of this show. But in the interest of keeping this video from running too long, I just want to focus on its main romantic subplot, namely the romance between Callum and Rayla. Because if you're a romance fan in any capacity, these two characters offer a case study in how to tell a quality love story. Behind every romantic subplot are two unique characters. And behind every individual character is a personality. But when you're developing a romance of any kind, it's critical that these personalities mesh in just the right way. Now that's not easy. There's certainly no magic formula to it. Opposites can indeed attract, but similar personalities and shared interests can attract just as much. There's just so much complexity behind two people coming together and falling in love, both in real life and in fiction. But all too often in fiction, the romance is either forced or contrived. Now, The Dragon Prince actively avoids this by keeping its priorities straight. Before any romance of any kind can develop, it puts great effort into developing the personalities of Callum, Rayla, and everyone else in this fanciful world. Like Avatar and Korra before it, there's a whole lot of world building and character development. For Callum and Rayla, we first learn about who these characters are, where they're at in life, and what they strive to be. In the first season, Callum and Rayla have their own unique goals, and none of them involve romantic entanglements of any kind. Callum is in a place of uncertainty in his life. He may be the stepson of King Harrow of Katalis, but he's not quite sure where he fits in. He has a keen interest in magic, and he also tries his hand at combat, which he struggles with mightily, much to the chagrin of his friends. But initially, he's just not sure where he fits in or what he's good at. By contrast, Rayla is already uniquely skilled as a fighter. Being a moon shadow elf, she is trained to be an assassin, and she is deeply influenced by elven culture, which in this world is locked in an ongoing war with humanity. But as skilled as she is, Rayla is also very different from her fellow Moonshadow elves. She reveals this in the very first episode when she has a chance to complete her first assassination. But even though she's able to subdue her target, she finds herself unable to take the life of someone who did her no harm. It's a powerful moment, one that reveals she's also not sure where she fits in. And that uncertainty is a key trait that both she and Callum share. However, it's the only unique trait that they share in the beginning. Because when their paths cross, they're on the opposite side of a human-elven conflict. Within that conflict, Rayla is part of a covert effort to assassinate King Harrow, and that makes them enemies by default. Now that's hardly a foundation for a good love story. But by being so far apart in the beginning, both Callum and Rayla have a lot of room to grow as individuals. Within their respective stories, we get a clear understanding of who they are before they ever even become allies. And that's critical for any well-developed romance, as well as any well-developed plot in general. But even before romance ever enters the equation, the Dragon Prince takes its time in fleshing out these characters as individuals. It doesn't skip any of the steps before it gets to the romance, something that one too many shows, sitcoms, and movies do all too often. In fact, I would argue that Callum and Rayla are a perfect example of why these steps should not be skipped when telling a quality love story. Think back to a time when you or someone you knew fell in love. How did it start? How did it feel? Most people can remember where they were when they first met someone they fell in love with, but not nearly as many will recall the process that helped that love blossom. Sure, there is a thing as love at first sight. It happens in the real world and it happens in fiction. Plenty of great love stories can be told in the mold of Romeo and Juliet, but as a romantic subplot, it's not very complex, and it can hinder individual character development as part of a larger plot. Because if a character becomes too defined by who loves them or who they love, then they become less a character and more a prize of someone's affection. See what happened to Jean Grey in the original X-Men trilogy. But the Dragon Prince takes a very different approach. It follows a more lengthy process towards developing the romance between Rayla and Callum. And that process does not start when they first meet. Again, they're on the opposite sides of a human-elven war. But even after they meet, they don't get along particularly well. Callum and Rayla only work together because they have a shared interest in returning the dragon egg to Xadia. But by working together, they soon develop a friendship. It does start off as a necessary allegiance, but over the course of the first 2 seasons, they start to genuinely care about one another. They come to trust one another. And it's not because they're actively seeking romance. They go through a lot of challenges and they just come to honestly, sincerely care for one another. Now that may not sound like much, but it's actually a critical step that tends to get glossed over in other love stories. Of course, people who fall in love care for each other, but how they get to that point is often overlooked or understated. This is where a lot of romantic subplots falter. There's just such a rush to get 2 characters romantically involved that it's just not well established how much or how little these characters care for one another. Now, fantasy stories in the mold of Tolkien, of which the Dragon Prince draws on, has a reputation for rushing things. Sitcoms and superhero comics can be even worse. It happens either too fast or too much happens in between the lines. But Callum and Rayla don't hide from that process. It does happen slowly, but not too slowly. First, Rayla has to get around her attitudes towards humans, and Callum has to do the same with Moonshadow elves. Both have been taught to hate and fear one another. They're both led to believe that elves are evil or humans are evil. But the more they're around one another, the more they realize how wrong those beliefs were. But even after getting over those beliefs, just caring about one another is one of many steps. Things don't start to get deeper until later, and that's where the stronger romantic forces really come into play. At the heart of every great romance is great chemistry. When 2 people are in love, fictional or otherwise, you see it in how they interact. They just complement each other so well. They make each other better on multiple levels. Just being together brings out the best version of themselves. And it's remarkable, not to mention frustrating, how many romances fail to grasp this. Sitcoms in particular are notorious for chemistry that feels forced or empty. Even dramatic shows like 90210 or Dawson's Creek try way too hard to make a romance happen, rather than simply let it happen. It's a big reason why a great many of these romances seem toxic when you take a step back. In The Dragon Prince, even after they start to care for one another, the chemistry between Rayla and Callum is subtle. It doesn't happen all at once. There's no singular moment in which them just caring for one another blossoms into full-blown romance. It happens gradually, and adorably even. The first tangible hint of that chemistry comes at the end of Season 2 when Callum is trapped in a fever dream. After tapping into dark magic, he's at a serious crossroads, one that could take him down many different paths. But Rayla doesn't know what's going on inside his mind. She just sees him suffering in this state, and seeing that helps her realize that she cares about him a little more than she thought. More hints like that unfold, especially in Season 3. Callum and Rayla go from just caring about one another to showing real concern for one another. When Rayla has to get past the blind dragon Sol Rayllum, he's understandably anxious. He has seen her narrowly escape many dangerous situations before. But now, he really cares for her to a point where it genuinely affects him. It also helps to some extent that these two are teenagers. Being young, immature, and a tad bit hormonal, they're bound to be uncertain of their feelings. Leads to plenty of awkward but cute moments. And don't underestimate the importance of cuteness in romance. Because if Baby Yoda has taught us anything, it's that cuteness carries a lot of weight. And in the context of romance, especially with Callum and Rayla, that element adds more to its sincerity. It conveys the sentiment that this is not being forced in any way. This is real, romantic chemistry manifesting before their eyes. And it's beautiful. It's honest. It brings out the best in both Callum and Rayla. The chemistry doesn't distract from other goals or personality traits. It affirms them. That's what a healthy romance does. It's not an easy state to reach for two characters in any genre. But these two manage to get there without it feeling rushed or forced. It also helps that it isn't dragged out either. And it's in this domain where the Dragon Prince exceeds even the likes of Avatar in terms of quality storytelling. Even when a romantic subplot takes all the necessary steps, even when it succeeds in establishing all the right kinds of chemistry, there's still a chance it can fall flat. That tends to happen a lot with relationships that are forced, but it happens just as much with relationships that drag on needlessly. At some point, the whole will they or won't they angle gets stale. And the longer it drags out, the worse it gets. This is why relationships like Ross and Rachel and Friends or Mulder and Scully in X-Files can lose their impact over time. And for a time, the Dragon Prince was in a position to really drag out the Callum-Rayla romance. Once the chemistry was in place, it didn't have to become official in the middle of Season 3. It could have even been effectively halted when they first kissed in Episode 4 of Season 3 during a moment of emotional vulnerability. But instead, the romance was allowed to emerge and blossom organically. It wasn't a smooth transition from potential romance to official romance, but again, these are teenagers we're talking about here. Having a less than smooth transition only makes it feel more real in this case, and that much more adorable. In terms of where Rayla and Callum are in their journey, the timing works perfectly. For 2 seasons, they dealt with many personal upheavals. Rayla had to contend with her being cast out by her fellow Moonshadow elves, and Callum had to contend with losing his connection to sky magic. They each had to grow as individuals before they came together as a couple. And that growth was not over the moment they kissed, but it was at a point where being together made them better individuals overall. Now, they still could have continued that journey on their own, and they could have kept growing. But by this point in the show, they've done plenty to prove themselves. This effectively frames them coming together romantically as a conscious choice. It's something they want to pursue, not something they need to pursue just to move forward. It's a common pitfall among many romantic subplots. Characters become so defined by it that their story as an individual is undercut by the romance. A lot of characters in Twilight fall into this trap, and quite a few pairings in CW's Arrowverse shows falter in the same way. But Callum and Rayla avoid this trap by coming together at just the right time. Moreover, doing so doesn't derail or undermine their respective journeys. If anything, it motivates them even more to succeed. It also pays off big time in the final battle of Season 3. And that payoff wouldn't have been nearly as great had the romance been allowed to needlessly drag out. And the overall world of the Dragon Prince is better because of that. A functional, balanced romance is one that's healthy for everyone involved. That's true for both real and fictional couples alike. And, much to the chagrin of romance fans like myself, there's no shortage of toxic romances in fiction. Game of Thrones is notorious for pushing the envelope on just how toxic certain entanglements can be, especially ones involving Cersei Lannister. But the Dragon Prince opts for the non-toxic kind of romance, and not just by getting the basics right for Callum and Rayla. What makes their romance work, even before they share their first kiss, is just how well they complement one another. By that, I don't just mean supporting each other when the going gets rough, or even by being there for one another when they're vulnerable. A healthy romance doesn't mean always supporting one another, always siding with them, and always telling them what they want to hear. In fact, that kind of love only tends to reinforce someone's less than noble qualities. Again, see Game of Thrones. You don't have to look far to see someone's worst traits being nourished by someone who claims to love them. Genuine love, the healthy kind of love, requires that we tell someone things they don't necessarily want to hear. Because when you really care about someone, you're willing to take that chance for them. You're willing to upset someone in order to help them. It's rarely a pleasant process, but we endure it for the ones we love. And that's exactly what Callum does with Rayla. In a pivotal scene in episode 4 of Season 3, the same episode they share their first kiss no less, Rayla finds herself in a very vulnerable situation. She's still reeling after being exiled from her homeland. She's now a pariah among her fellow Moonshadow elves. And it's all because of choices she made and the consequences that came with those choices. But instead of coddling Rayla and just telling her what she wants to hear, Callum tells her what she needs to hear. And he's not polite about it either. He's almost harsh at first, but it brings her out of this pit of despair. He reminds her just how strong she is and how much she's overcome. It's a powerful moment, and one she could have reacted to harshly. But again, Callum takes that chance, because that's what you do for someone you love. And in that powerful moment, their love goes from just being a possibility to something that's very real. More than that, it's a love that's genuinely good and healthy for them. It's as healthy a romance as two awkward teenagers can hope for. And it only gets more meaningful as the stakes rise in the final battle of Season 3. All too often, the act of two characters becoming a couple is treated as an endpoint. They spend all this time getting closer and setting up that big romantic kiss. And then that kiss happens, the credits roll, and everyone lives happily ever after. Now that's a sweet sentiment and all, but it's painfully lacking in depth. Even exceptionally well-written shows like Avatar: The Last Airbender take this approach. Now granted, that show never focused too heavily on romance, even on its main pairing, Aang and Katara. It certainly didn't derail the overall quality of the story. Romance just wasn't a particularly big part of that story, nor was it necessary by the time the story ended. The Dragon Prince did not treat Rayla and Callum getting together as an ending. It didn't even treat it as a new beginning either. Their romantic subplot was effectively weaved into the various other plots unfolding around them. When they became official, it didn't disrupt or distort those plots. It just supplemented them, like icing on a cake that already had plenty of layers. Their individual journeys still continued. Rayla still continued to struggle to regain her place with her fellow Moonshadow elves. Callum continued his efforts to become a mage. And getting together didn't change that. It just made everything about their respective journeys more personal. Just getting the Dragon Prince, Zim, back to his mother to stop a war wasn't their only motivation anymore. They now had each other. This makes key moments at the end of Season 3 carry so much more emotional weight. Their individual efforts to stop Viren, save Zadia, and prevent a larger war that could have consumed both their homes, it all becomes so deeply personal to the both of them. Being together, being in love, and having this connection, it's not the end of the journey, it's part of the journey. Most importantly, it makes that journey more compelling. They still could have done it as individuals. They probably could have succeeded as individuals as well. But they did it together. That's what they chose. That's what they embraced. And it made the events that unfolded at the end all the more rewarding. That's how you make a romantic subplot impactful. That's how you make it genuine and heartfelt. It's not the end, it's not the beginning. Ultimately, it supplements both the story and the characters. And when done right, it's a beautiful thing. Callum and Rayla are proof of that. And as a longtime romance fan, I'm grateful for that. There's so much more I could say about the Dragon Prince and the romance between Callum and Rayla. As a longtime lover of romantic subplots, this romance really raised the bar. It perfectly demonstrates how a well-developed romance can improve an equally well-developed story. It shows how love, in its purest manifestation, can make great characters even better. Callum and Rayla didn't have to become romantically involved for the story of the Dragon Prince to work. Even the show's creators made it clear that they never set out to bring them together. They just let the story and the character development guide them, and it just happened to take a romantic turn. But the overall narrative is better because of that. In the real world, a healthy romance takes a lot of hard work and dedication from all those involved. And even in a world of fantasy, full of magic, dragons, elves, and talking bugs, quality romance requires that same mutual effort. It can't be forced or rushed. Even when the chemistry is there, you can't treat it as the final endgame. It's just another step in a shared journey. Callum and Rayla didn't set out to share that journey. They each had their own individual hopes, goals, and desires. Circumstances and choices brought them together. By so many measures, theirs was an unlikely allegiance, and an even less likely romance. Rayla is still a moonshadow elf. Callum is still a human and the stepson of a king. These are two individuals who faced many unique obstacles. And with Season 4 of The Dragon Prince in development, they're likely to face many more. But despite these circumstances, they still came together. They still fell in love. And the story surrounding them makes that love all the more special. It's a rare but beautiful accomplishment in the annals of romantic subplots. Because even in a fantasy world, the impact of a great love story can feel so real and so heartfelt. Thanks for watching, everyone, and thanks for joining me in my world. Please remember to like, comment, and subscribe. Until next time, take care and stay safe.